Now, Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba will arrive in the United States later today in his first trip abroad in this portfolio. Gigaba will be meeting with Moody's ratings agencies as well as potential investors. Gigaba told the media yesterday that there's no guarantee that the country will not once again be downgraded. He said a downgrading by Moody's will have a devastating impact on the country's economy. Now, Moody's is the only agency that has not yet downgraded South Africa to junk status. And our correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease is in Washington and he joins us live now for a brief update on Gigaba's U.S. trip. Sherwin, a very good afternoon to you. Has Minister Gigaba arrived in the country? And please take us through his itinerary for this trip.
Well, I can confirm that I got a text from his spokesperson about an hour ago to say that they had just landed. That was around 9 a.m. Eastern time. That's around 3 p.m. your time. So I imagine they will go and freshen up at the hotel very briefly before they head to the building where I'm standing. I'm at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund headquarters in Washington, D.C. And we've just come out of a press conference with the IMF Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, which followed a press conference by the President of the World Bank. And really, the news is positive, Alicia. The economy, the global economy is growing. So a soft landing in a sense for South Africa's newly minted finance minister as he arrives here. And as you mentioned, a lot of stress given remarks by Standard & Poor's earlier today, adding stress to an already stressful week for him in terms of them warning South Africa that their downgrade to junk status could go even deeper into junk status. So that could be the first of more downgrades if investors are not satisfied with the policy direction that South Africa will take into the future. So we are, as you say, waiting, standing by for his arrival here at the IMF, and a number of things that he will engage in, a BRICS working group meeting, and of course BRICS countries are discussing the start of their own ratings agency. Let's see what will come out of that meeting. He will also meet with G20 and African Advisory Group, a working lunch with G20 finance ministers, Reserve Bank governors. So Moody's, the meeting with Moody's will come later next week. Very much a policy sharing, best practice sharing here at the IMF today.
Look, very interesting that you bring that up, Sherwin. A lot of people have been asking this side, who rates these ratings agencies and how do they decide to up or downgrade, citing the fact that South Africa currently has functional systems like your banking sector compared to other countries like your Brazil that were downgraded.
Well, you mentioned Brazil, and that's a very good example. Of course, Brazil going through one of the deepest recessions in the country's history. We just come out of a briefing where that was touched on. And of course, the fear in South Africa is that if Moody's were to downgrade South Africa's credit and sovereign rating to below junk status, there are real fears that South Africa will also dip into a recession. But of course, the global sentiment is positive. Certainly from the discussions we've been listening to here today, the world economy is expected to grow at 3.5% this year, up to 3.6% this year. So that's very positive. Demand for commodities is up in China. Growth, we were beginning to see the growing roots of the United States economy. And when the two world's largest economies begin to grow, everyone benefits from that. But what we are hearing from these discussions as well is that there are various headwinds. Let me just look at my notes. Conflict situations, refugee shocks, climate change, which is a big mitigating factor for African countries, in particular South Africa, just now recovering from severe droughts over the last number of years, the question of famine in very many countries, and the question of political and policy uncertainty, which is very much relevant to the South African discussion right now. All these are factors that all economies need to deal with, no less the South African economy that finds itself in the throes of uncertainty right now.
Well, Sherwin, we do understand that Minister Gigaba is going to try and assure Moody's in particular that this was just a cabinet reshuffle and not a change to policy. But what are some of the business minds saying in the U.S. about this? Does South Africa still have a chance to redo the economic damage at this stage?
Well, there's always a chance, isn't there? But I think what South Africa needs to do, and I think we began to see that from South Africa's Deputy President addressing the BBC, the Black Business Council last night, is an explanation of what radical economic transformation means exactly. If the policy framework for South Africa's economy is not going to change, investors want to know then why was it important to change the leadership at the Treasury? Why was it important to fire Pravin Gordhan and replace him with Malusi Gigaba? What does that then mean for policy? Why all these changes? And I think that's a very hard sell that the minister will have. Part of the discussion in terms of radical economic transformation are questions around nationalization, questions around South Africa's expropriation bill. Will they do away with the willing buyer, willing seller notion and expropriate without compensation? These are the tough questions that the minister is going to answer. Sophie Mukwena, in a discussion with you yesterday, spoke also about the policy conference of the African National Congress that happens in June, and of course that will then have to be voted on at the main conference in December. What does the landscape look like in the future? And these are some of the tough questions that businesses, investors, international policy stakeholders want to hear from. We tried very much to get our hand into the mix in that press conference with Christine Lagarde earlier, really wanting her to weigh in terms of which direction is viable, the best possible option for South Africa. Unfortunately, we didn't get that option, but it's not my birthday today, Alicia, it's yours.
Thank you so much for that. That is where we leave it, show, and we'll definitely get in touch with you throughout the U.S. trip for our Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba. That is showing Bryce-Pease and his live tours from Washington in the United States with an update of Malusi Gigaba's U.S. trip to try and woo potential investors.